Hello and welcome back. In fact, welcome to our final video on our series, in our series on understanding research articles. And in this video, we're going to be talking about conclusions, the last part of a research article, and talking about identifying the interpretations and implications of a study. And this is adapted from Plano Clark and Creswell 2015, Chapter 14. Okay, so conclusions. Do you identify the conclusions and supporting information in a study report? Okay, so research reports end with researchers drawing conclusions about the results and the overall study. They make interpretations about the results. They evaluate the procedures and results that occurred. And typically, you'll find this under the heading conclusions or discussion, and it'll be immediately following the results or findings section. And here we get information that allows you to make sense of the results. So the researcher often returns to the original purpose and research questions, discusses the implications of the results, and discusses the strengths and weaknesses of the study. So, and it might come under different names, and those different goals might be broken apart. But in general, in the concluding section or sections of a study, you'll get a summary of the major results. You'll get a discussion relating those results to the literature. You might get personal reflections of the researcher about the meaning of the research. You might get implications for practice. You will usually get something, about the limitations of the study. You might get future research needs, and usually that draws directly from the limitations part. And then some kind of statement about the overall significance of the study. So the summary of the major results. Now, this is different from the presentation of the actual results in that it's really the summary. You're getting general rather than specific information, so you may not be getting exact numbers, right? But more if something increased or decreased, that kind of thing. You're highlighting the most important results. So some of those little ancillary things that the also founds, won't usually be mentioned if they're not that important. And also, it may be organized by research question. You're going to read recaps of the key results in response to each research question or hypothesis. Now, a quantitative summary might state whether a hypothesis was rejected or confirmed and how the research question was answered, whereas a qualitative summary may restate the major themes, answer the research questions, provide general learnings, that kind of thing. And mixed methods or action research studies may include both types of summaries. Now, discussion relating the results to the literature. So in the front end, we had our literature review, right? Well, now we refer back to that literature. We're going to interpret how our results are similar to or different from, or extend the ideas already found in various other bodies of literature, other papers. Maybe we're extending some aspect or clarifying some aspect of a theory. We might discuss whether our findings support or contradict results from prior studies, and hopefully we can include some kind of explanation about why our results turned out the way that they did, particularly if they turned out differently from some well-accepted theory or well-regarded prior research. And basically, we want the theory of the research question, our hypothesis, the theory, the conceptual framework that guided our research. We want to relate back to that. And hopefully those will kind of all be in line. Particularly with qualitative research, We might have personal reflections of the researcher about the meaning of the research. And some really strong quantitative research does this as well. It's very common in qualitative and action research and some mixed methods research, because there's this, perspective that personal views can't really be kept separate from the interpretation. So we might as well, since we're the instrument in a qualitative, from a qualitative perspective, we might as well talk about our personal reflections. It may include hunches, insights, or reflections on the larger meanings of our findings. Then implications for practice. Now, this is something that's very common in practice-based research, or it's such as, a research in the professions, whether it's in education or counseling or that kind of thing, in the social sciences, and in fields where, where there is practice, there's a profession involved, whether it's physical therapy or sports management, that kind of thing. Okay, so what are the implications for the audiences that are identified in the statement of the problem, or the audiences who read that journal? How might different audiences benefit from the results? And you might have several audiences. You might have practitioners who are in the field. You might have other researchers who are doing work in that field. You might have students of the field that you might talk about how these, or policymakers too, how these different audiences, the way your results relate to the needs of these different audiences. You might recommend useful actions in response to the new knowledge that resulted from your study, and include suggestions of what practitioners might do in their practice settings. So here's an example from a paper that came out of my master's from Harvard in learning and teaching. And so I did the research as part of my master's program, and then it took like 2 years to get published because I was better at doing the research than I was at writing it. But I was very grateful to have it published in the Journal of Teacher Education. And what I was interested in at that time was alternative teacher certification. So these fast track programs that get teachers, prospective teachers into classrooms quickly. And the most well-known national program is Teach for America. And here in Georgia, we have the Teacher Academy for Preparation and Pedagogy, the TAP program, that is run through various, local education agencies. And so what I was looking at is how well prepared did these new alternatively certified teachers report feeling, and how did that relate to what they received in their program. And I looked at not just alternative certified teachers, but looked at all a lot of new teachers. There was like 1,600 new teachers whose surveys I was analyzing. And so here's the first paragraph of the conclusion from that paper, and here it is. Here's a printout of the paper. And it was a heavily quantitative paper. Yeah, it came out to be like 16 pages. And it was back when I was Ayana Key and not Ayana Key Campoli yet. I had met my husband, though, by the time this was published, although we weren't married. And so, I had the usual sections, the literature review, the methodology section. Again, these were survey results. The measures that I used are listed in the methodology section. And my data analytic procedures, I used a quasi-experimental procedure called propensity score matching. And then my findings, I got a table there. There's another table. Another table. Another table. Heavily quantitative. a table and a couple of graphs. A couple more graphs, right? These are all in the findings. Then I have a section that I call discussion and implications. And there I have one part called on program administration and policy. So those are my implications for program directors and policymakers. Then I have another section that I titled on teacher education research. So those are my implications directed toward researchers. And then I have a conclusion section. All right, that was a couple of paragraphs. And let's just talk about the first paragraph. And so the first sentence makes a general statement supported by research about my topic. And that was because I was interested in this idea of how feelings of preparedness relate to self-efficacy, ultimately relate to career decisions. And so I wrote, new teacher career decisions are often driven by their perceptions of their effectiveness and other factors that relate directly to the quality of their preparation programs. And then I summarized my research question. Now I probably had two or three official research questions. Let's see. Yep, I had 3 of them. But in the conclusion, I'm just summarizing. Okay, and I write, therefore, in this study, I examine the extent to which program features relate to new teacher feelings of preparedness. Okay, and then I summarize my findings. So I showed you all of those tables and like 4 graphs relate to my findings. But in the conclusion, it's one sentence. According to my research, first-year teachers who have fewer types of education coursework and shorter field experiences feel less well prepared than teachers whose pedagogical preparation is more complete. So, and I was looking at things like, did they get classes in theory? Did they get classes in child development? Did they get classes in pedagogy? You know, what was their coursework like? And then how long was their practice teaching? Was it, you know, less than 4 weeks? Was there no practice teaching? Was it less than 4 weeks? Was it, you know, maybe a couple of months? Was it a full semester? Was it longer? And then, but again, in the conclusion, one sentence. And then I talk about some implications. So in terms of program configuration, this means that teachers whose alternative certification programs allow them to begin full-time teaching without having had coursework or field experiences. So that's those emergency certified teachers, right? It's like, yeah, you have a bachelor's, great. You passed our criminal background check, great. You're in the classroom, right? These teachers will feel the least well prepared in their first year, okay? Which you kind of would expect since they've had no preparation. And then also my results suggest that alternative certification programs that recruit teachers and provide abbreviated pre-service education, but do not continue the initial teacher education into the first year, will yield beginning teachers who do not feel well prepared. So if they had 6 weeks of training over the summer, that's better than nothing, but they still will not feel well prepared. And that may have consequences for their later career decisions. Do they decide, well, I didn't feel good about how I did. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't feel good about how I did. I don't think I'm going to stick with teaching. You know what I mean? So I basically was talking about implications for practice. If you make your program look like this, here's what the result might be based on the results from my study. I really enjoyed doing that project enough to, you know, work on an even bigger project for my doctorate. So I'm glad I was able to share a little bit of that with you. Okay, so now some other sections that are usually in the conclusion, limitations of the study. or in the usually in the end part somewhere, most likely the conclusion, but somewhere in the back half, you get a critical evaluation of the actual research study. It should identify potential weaknesses or problems with the study that may have affected the results. And one of the things is about the peer review process is it really helps you identify those limitations, because often if the reviewers don't feel like you've picked up on all the limitations of their study, they have no problem letting you know what those limitations were. That's one of the benefits of the peer review process. It can be useful to other potential researchers who may choose to conduct a similar study, because them knowing about the limitations of yours, maybe they can address one of those limitations. And that's one of the things that I argued in this paper, was that I was addressing a limitation of prior studies that's called selection bias, and my methodology was addressing that. And it can help to it can help the reader to judge how the procedures may limit the applicability of the study's findings. Okay, so it can be helpful for the reader. Also, future research needs, suggestions about additional research studies that need to be conducted. And usually my study was limited in this way, so future studies should do X, right? And it may highlight areas that are unknown, and provide boundaries for using the particular study's information, and identify important knowledge that is still missing. So for folks who are pursuing their thesis or their dissertation, or who need to do a thesis or dissertation, this future research needs part can be really useful because it can give ideas about what needs to be studied next in order to move a particular line of inquiry forward. The overall significance of the study. This ends the research report on a positive note. It includes strong statements of the conclusions and a wrap-up of what this study accomplished, what new knowledge was generated, and why this knowledge is important. So like my last sentence said, the challenge is to determine how teacher educators can design programs that offer sufficient preparation so that novice alternatively certified teachers will feel well prepared to teach in the schools where they are needed most, while the programs also offer the expedited entry into the profession that is one of the strengths of alternative certification. Our response to this challenge has the potential to improve the retention of alternatively certified teachers in the profession and to improve the learning of the children they serve. Right? So you can end on a positive note. We want to improve children's learning. And it gives that wrap up. Now, among different research approaches, you can imagine that the conclusions may be similar or different. And in both quantitative and qualitative studies, you're going to find a summary of the results or findings. For quantitative studies, they're usually going to be organized by research question, and they will for some qualitative studies, but qualitative studies usually organize them by themes that were found, because the research question tends to be much broader. And so we're going to talk about what we found under various themes. For quantitative conclusions, you might have an explanation of the results in terms of predictions and prior studies, right? So my results are explained. They either confirm or disconfirm my predictions, and they're, this is how my results relate to prior studies. Now, for qualitative conclusions, remember, the quantitative perspective is that there is truth out there, and we're just going about discovering that universal truth, right? And so, yeah, this is how my little study is in line with all this knowledge we are generating and trying to build up to get a picture of universal truth. For qualitative studies, there's already a perspective of subjectivity, and that you have all these different perspectives on a particular phenomenon. So you might have a comparison of findings, of the findings from a particular study to existing studies. but you're not necessarily expecting to, add more knowledge that's going to lead to the truth, because there are different perspectives, right? So you might have a comparison, but it's a slightly different expectation on in terms of how you expect um, your results to relate, or the current paper's results to relate to existing work. And then qualitative conclusions may also, as I mentioned before, include personal reflections, because the researcher is the instrument and the perspective is seen as important, as opposed to this idea of there's this objective researcher who's just reporting the facts, ma'am. Okay. Now, implications and suggestions for practice, that may be similar across qualitative and quantitative studies. Limitations, both may mention limitations, although the nature of what the limitations are will probably be different. So both may provide suggestions for future research, and both will most likely talk about the overall significance of the study. And then mixed methods in action research may use a combination of those things in order to conclude their study. Now, in the back matter of a research report, you have things like endnotes, references, author notes, appendices. We're going to focus on talking about references. So, slide 15. References appear after the conclusion setting under the heading of references, usually. Include detailed information about all the sources used in writing the report. The list should be complete, and editors of journals, one of their tasks that they set out for the authors, and they're like, and copy editors are like, okay, you mentioned this in the text, but you don't have this in the reference list, or it's in the reference list, but you don't mention it in the text. The list should be complete, prepared with good style, and there's some guidelines on that, and should be accurate. And then as the reader, we review the references. We want to see if there are current references from good, what we consider reliable, rigorous sources. And also, one of the nice things when you're studying a topic is that the references can help you easily identify and locate other studies that on your topic that might be of interest to you. In terms of format, in educational research reports, references are usually listed in alphabetical order based on the last names of the first author, and you'll be familiar with that from all the stuff that we've been reading and that you've read for your other courses. And the formatting and ordering of the references in the reference list depends on the style that was used. So in education and in counseling, APA, or the American Psychological Association style, is the most common. But in kinesiology, it might be different. So, for example, the American Journal of Sports Medicine refers authors to the AMA, or American Medical Association style manual. And it's just, they're just certain differences of convention in terms of how the references are listed. Some reports and trade publications list the references in the order in which they appear within the report's text. So this is most common when references are numbered in the text and listed as endnotes. So in APA style, for example, your in-text citations are author's last name and the year, right, in parentheses. But you'll notice particularly in some journals where you don't, where maybe a trade journal and they don't want to interrupt the flow of what you're reading with this parenthetical citation, or it's a report, that kind of thing. They'll put, one, and then at the end, it's you get the reference that was for one, and then two, and so on. Yeah, and so I of course, if we're talking about references, this is slide 17, it makes sense that I would include the reference to my paper here. And yeah, so that finishes out our series on understanding research, in particular understanding qualitative and quantitative research reports. We hope that you have enjoyed this series of lectures. All right. And we wish you, much happiness and excitement while you're reading journal articles in the future. Okay. Have a good night. Thank you, everyone.